Hi, welcome to God Stories today. My name's Chris Thompson. You guys coming? Hello, welcome to God Stories today. I'm in quite an amazing location. I'm in Chester and I'm in Mitchell Motors and I'm with Mark Mitchell, the founder of Mitchell Motors, and we're going to get into the story of that in a moment. But suffice it to say, he is a Christian businessman and he's got quite a God story to say the least. So welcome to you all, and I hope this interview blesses you deeply. Before we start though, as I might say usually, please do check us out on social media, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Just look for God Stories Today and also subscribe to the channel. This channel is all for the glory of God. So if you can subscribe, that'll be wonderful because it's about supporting what we're doing here for God. Also keep an eye out for information coming up about our conference, which is hopefully going to be on the 9th of October in 2021, but information will be forthcoming. Mark, it's absolutely wonderful to be here with you. This has been in the diary now for a number of months.
It has. It's good to have you here, Chris, as well.
Thank you.
So pleased to welcome you.
And can I just say, I genuinely do feel like, you know, the phrase, a boy in a toy shop or a child in a toy shop. I feel like I am definitely in that sort of environment right now.
Well, just look at the car behind you.
I've got to be honest, viewers. There's a number of cars, as you might imagine, and if Mark Mitchell permits me, I'll go and get some B-roll montage of all the super cool cars that are here so I can slice it into the interview. But I had to insist that I have the Mazda MX-5 behind me. It's just like the ultimate car. I'd love to have one of those bad boys. So thank you for the backdrop and so forth. Obviously this is a showroom, so you're going to see people walking behind us and you're going to hear like the background ambient noise of that, but I quite like the texture of that, so I hope that's okay with you. Mark, once again, thank you for this opportunity to interview you. I'm thrilled to be here and I'm really eager to dig into your God story because the research that I've done has revealed that you've had quite a story to tell. You know, you've got quite a story to tell, which is wonderful. We normally start though with a snapshot of where the person is right now. So who are you and what are you, if you like?
Well, I'm a happily married guy, married to a gorgeous wife, gorgeous godly wife, Anita. We've got two boys, James, who's 23, Elliot, who's 19. And we live just outside Chester on the Wirral Peninsula, the Paradise Peninsula. And we're very happy and joined up as a family. And of course, the business is an adjunct to our home life as well. So the business is something that we really enjoy having created and really appreciate and value the opportunity to lead it now in 2020.
We're now going to start at the very, very beginning, but I just want to say to the viewers, I've only known Mark now for about 30 minutes, but what I think I can say in that 30-minute time is that I've learned that he's got a great sense of humour. It's quite a dry sense of humour, and I'm hoping that's going to come out in the interview as well. So I just thought I'd let you know about that. He's got a really, really great sense of humour. It's a funny guy. Where were you born?
I was born in a little fishing village called Birkenhead, where we build ships at Camel Leads. So I'm a Birkenhead boy, born in the early 60s in Birkenhead and brought up there, primary school and then school in Birkenhead School before going away to university.
And what were you like as a child?
I was probably Monday to Saturday, fairly entrepreneurial.
I was going to say, you know, where the entrepreneurial spark starts
fairly
to sort of
entrepreneurial, and on a Sunday, probably I was the Sunday school teacher's nightmare, Chris. So I was the kind of guy at 7 or 8 who'd bring in stink bombs or dead rodents or even less pleasant things. And yet, despite the faithfulness week by week of these amazing old dears who must have been at least 16 or 17 years of age,
right,
who I still know now, of course, they're in their early 60s, these gorgeous godly women. I've said that twice, once about my wife as well, haven't I? But my Sunday school teachers were really committed and faithful week by week to making the Bible relevant and bring it to life for me.
Right.
In terms of what I was like, I guess my first business venture was in the livestock sector.
I've heard about this. Go on.
Well, I could tell you the story if you'd like. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, long before I knew the facts of life, the birds and the bees, Chris, I found that if I put two hamsters in a cage together and turned the lights down low and put some very early Graham Kendrick on by way of backdrop music, just 16 days later, there were no longer two hamsters in the cage, there were at least a dozen. And I knew I could turn these pesky hamsters into cash in the school playground. So my first business venture at the age of 9 or 10 was hamster production and marketing.
I'm going to go into the business side of things now. We should wait a little bit. I just want to say though, like at that age though, even though we're joking about that, clearly there was something of that sort of entrepreneurial spark in you right from the get-go. What did it feel like in your heart when obviously this situation was in front of you? What did it feel like in your heart that made you motivated to sort of like, well, sell these hamsters?
Well, I like creating things and I like producing things, I suppose. And at the age of 9 or 10, there was nothing, very little more impactful than someone saying yes to one of my hamsters during lunch break, as the baby hamster left one blazer pocket and was passed into another blazer pocket.
So what you did, you'd bring a hamster in your blazer pocket?
Yeah, because I couldn't get a cage, could I, in the back of mother's car, and she didn't know about it either, really, so nor did the teachers at school. So, yeah, there was nothing better than someone saying yes to one of my hamsters.
Hamster, though? I mean, I can imagine myself in my primary school sort of time, when the world was black and white, if I'd gone into my school with some hamsters and tried to sell them, there's just no way I would have pulled that off. So would you say this gift of being able to sell and the entrepreneurial spark is something that's innate?
I think it probably is, and it's cultivated and encouraged by people around you as well. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I read as well that your second venture into entrepreneurial business was to sell motorbikes at the school gate. Is that right? Yeah,
in the sixth form at the school, yeah. And I remember my school reports reading, if Mark put half as much effort into his academic studies as he does his commercial activities, he might do quite well in life.
So tell us about that, and what did that look like? Because there you are, you're in the sixth form, and I think I read that your father helped you sort of get hold of the bikes. I could be wrong on that one. And you somehow sold quite a copious amount of these motorbikes, literally at the school gate.
Well, we all in the 70s, late 70s, went to school on mopeds, so they were fairly common currency for 16-year-olds who were looking 12 months down the line waiting for their car license. So mopeds were the next best thing after a pedal bike. So yes, that was good. I did do some work at school, and I managed to read economics at Leeds University.
Right.
And that's when the motorbike business really took off. So,
and I read something like you sold something like 200 motorbikes in a year whilst you were at the university.
Yeah, well, over my 3 years at Leeds, together with two other fellow economists, we got through quite a few motorbikes, and we learnt to tithe on our profits, which was a real challenge for me at 18. Because
we'll get into that. We
must do.
The tithing thing, because obviously that leads into how you run your business as well. And I really want to sort of like major on it, if we may. When, therefore, did Christianity come into all of this? Was there a turning point at some point?
Well, my parents were very keen for us to get involved with a lively local church, and we did. From the age of 2 or 3 years of age, a church called St Mary's, Upton, at the top of the Wirral in Chester Diocese. And the church had grown from 50 to 550, 600 during a short space of time, under the leadership of an outstanding vicar called Roy Barker, whose ministry was about engaging with people, knocking on doors, introducing himself, visiting, an amazing ministry. And so for me, it became a very natural thing to be part of the church family. And as with many young people, there's an opportunity to go away on a residential camp in the summer and hear very clearly the Christian gospel, the Christian message, often in the evening, in a sort of informal setting. And for me, I was 11 years of age when I heard the gospel very clearly. A guy from St Helens in Lancashire, a guy called Steve, spoke very passionately, incredibly and engagingly to a group of 11-year-olds. And for me, that was the moment, very clearly, the 1st of June, 1973, when I decided to follow Jesus Christ. I didn't understand about credit cards, didn't understand about mortgages or marriages, but I made a very simple but sincere commitment to follow Christ. And that's the foundation block where I built the rest of my life on since then. Yeah.
Clearly that was a momentous moment. So can we dig into that a little bit more, if we may?
Yes.
So there you are. Did you say 11?
Yes.
You're 11 years old. You're on this Christian camp. Was
Yeah.
it the first one you'd ever been on?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Okay, and you heard the gospel explained to you with such great clarity and printed itself on your heart, it would seem.
Yes.
Tell us what that was like. Take us to that evening now. Draw the picture for us.
Well, Chris, it was a while ago, so I'll try my best.
Bless you.
But memories fade, don't they? The detail of the memories fade. It was a wonderful camp. It was called Barnston Dale Camp near Heswell on the Wirral. And I joined the Pathfinder group at our church, Church of England Church. And we had wonderful days. High energy, that sense of independence at 11, living away from home. Mm-hmm. One or two of us felt a bit homesick, I guess, but there was that strong pastoral safety net in place for us all. We were well taken care of. And we were being led by familiar faces who were walking a journey with us throughout the year on a Sunday. And night by night, there was chance to explore who Jesus was and the difference it would make in your life if you had Jesus leading you through life. And so it wasn't complex theology, and nor would you expect it to be at 11, but it was a very simple offer. Grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. And for me, I think it might have been towards the end of the week. Forgive me, I can't remember the exact detail, but that was the time, without an understanding of all that would hit me in adult life. That was the time when I sensed I wanted to make the most important decision in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was not just a time when you thought, I'm going to explore this further. It literally was a time when you gave your life to Christ, and from that moment on you were a Christian, and it affected your life forevermore.
I think it built on all the stuff that my Sunday school teachers had taught me, week in, week out.
Yeah.
Despite all the tricks we got up to in church on a Sunday morning. But no, that was a milestone for me. That was very significant.
So at the age of 11, this momentous occurrence happened. And what happened after that then? How did it change your life? I mean, were you one thing one day and then sort of behaving differently the next day? I mean, how did it start to manifest?
No, I don't think at 11 or 12, certainly as a boy, you start working out the Christian life in the way we would as young adults. We wouldn't have that grasp of scripture, that grasp of direction and purpose and lifestyle that we'd come to terms with as adults. But it was really clear, and I felt different, and I was affirmed by those around me, and then encouraged to tell people about it, which was the key thing, I think, at whatever stage in life we're at. If we tell people that we have made a conscious decision to turn our lives around and to follow Jesus Christ, that gives you a confidence, and it brings your decision into the public arena. Yeah.
Can you, I know, as you say, it was a long time ago, but can you remember any of the moments when you did tell people about your faith?
Oh yes.
Yeah?
Oh yes, because week by week our Pathfinder leader, our youth leader, would say, well folks, who have you told about the love of the Lord Jesus this week? And 11 or 12, that was a difficult one to word. So the best I could really do at 13, 14 was to tell my pals at my all-boys school. They really had to come with me on a Sunday because there were so many pretty girls. And amazingly, and in God's goodness, 12 out of my form of 26 boys came to faith.
Really?
Yeah. One of whom's a vicar now, which does
really
make me smile. So, that was my own journey. And those guys are really close to me still, all walking different journeys in life in different parts of the world, but we're still a very tight community.
That's so wonderful.
40 years on.
So it was tough, but you actually did it, and there's been some fruit from it, to say the least.
Oh, hugely.
Okay then, so you mentioned you're at university and you're selling all these motorbikes, so by now I guess it's been 7, 8, 9 years past.
Yeah.
And you've been working out what it is to be a Christian in life generally, because it's always a journey, isn't it? And then you say you started to tithe. Talk about that, because I would imagine that leads us nicely into how you run your business as well. So talk about, how that came upon you, the notion of tithing, because you're no doubt making a handsome profit from selling 200 motorbikes a year, as it were. How did that come about, the notion of tithing?
Well, in my first term at Leeds, I determined to visit 9 or 10 different styles of church, because I'd been to the same church, the same style, all the way through my primary and secondary school years. And so I went to a Catholic church, I went to a Baptist church, I went to a Pentecostal church, I went to a Quaker church, I went to small churches and large churches. And that was really eye-opening for me in terms of different expressions of faith and different styles of churchmanship. But I settled at a lively Church of England church, attended by lots of students in Leeds, charismatic in its style, and the first week the vicar spoke on giving.
All right.
Ideal, really, if you've got all these students who just received their student grant the previous Thursday.
Wise.
And I'd never heard about tithing before. It's interesting. You must switch off when you're a teenager, and there are girls in the church, as was the case. But no, I decided, as part of my worship and my expression of faith and my private commitment to God, I would tithe, which was quite painful. Because a student grant of £1,500 a year was a tithe of £150 a year. Or for those mathematically minded, £3 a week, which was at least 2 Chinese takeaways, Chris.
Ouch!
But I was faithful to that, and God's honoured that over the years.
Really?
So yes, we were driving around in sports cars and eating in restaurants at Leeds rather than scratching around for our next meal as students, but we took giving, with a close friend of mine, we took giving very seriously, and that's something that's followed me through life.
And did you see God bless you in that?
I've got to be careful with this, because blessing doesn't follow
I know it's not
giving.
a slot machine sort of thing, but because I totally understand that. But I think if it's an honourable thing, if the motivation is good and it's not about tithing because you want to get something, then I actually think, from what I've heard from other people and myself, then God honours that. And I'm just wondering what God might have sort of like done as you
I think as Christians we should and we want to feel blessed in our lives. That blessing needn't be a material thing, it could be a peace thing, it could be a whole host of things. Did I feel blessed after I tithed? Was I blessed after I tithed? There's a lovely phrase, and it's perhaps overused even, but God is no man's debtor. And throughout my life I've never found myself not in a position to do something because I've tithed. In fact, because I've tithed, I've probably found myself in a position to do more things in life. There's a lovely scripture which we must talk about later, because it forms part of our family coat of arms, which is from 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 30, and you just touched on it. He who honours God, God will honour. And that's something that
Gary Grant said the same thing.
Did he? No, I said it first.
Sorry, Gary.
But that's become a really significant scripture for us, not just for me and Anita, but for our sons as well. And we'll talk about it later.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Absolutely love to. So there you are, you're at university. What was your first business when you came out of university?
Well, because we'd rented a rather scruffy house in Headingley, Leeds, from a chap called Ronnie Lasardi, whose niece became far more famous than Ronnie. Her name was Linda Lasardi. You'd have to take a red top paper to recognise the name.
Was she a page 3 model?
She was. But let's get back to Ronnie, her uncle.
Let's do that.
And Ronnie didn't have the same getting the same line of work as his niece, so he got into ice cream vans and student property. And for just £7 a week, each of you could rent Ronnie's house in Headingley. And because we skipped off economic history on a Wednesday and had the notes photocopied, the lecture notes photocopied, we could be over at the auction centre in Bradford buying motorbikes that had been repossessed from people who couldn't keep up with their payments. When you show that kind of initiative, not a great initiative, but some initiative compared to some students, you find yourself in a position where when you apply for jobs, there are interviews coming your way in your final year at university.
Right.
So back to your question, what did I end up doing? Well, I was fortunate position where I was interviewed and offered positions with most of the big blue chip companies in the country, Barclays and Marks and Spencer's, Procter and Gamble, and several others. But I was offered a position in the motor industry with Rover Cars, and that really caught my eye. And I joined as a graduate together with 60 others.
Wow.
Convinced that I could be the answer to all British Leyland's misfortunes. And with this newly branded Rover car, I could be pivotal in the relaunch of the brand. And I joined Rover at 21, and then Ford Motor Company at 23 or 4, and then I went on to the dealership side of the business for 2 very large companies who have representation across the UK.
So cars then started to loom large in your life like that. Are cars to you a business thing, or are they a passion to you at the same time? I mean, I love cars. I just can't afford them because I'm a minister. Right? I love them. I'm an avid fan of Top Gear and Grand Tour. If I could actually do that for a living, I would. But or are cars to you?
Chris, maybe it's like working in a sweet shop. Or if I could allude to my father's career at Cadbury's, you could have as much chocolate to eat in your first week.
Can you imagine that?
And that was a policy then, just as much as you like, just dip in on the production line, have as many. And by the end of the first week, you never want to see another jar of chocolate again. It probably reduced the theft and pilferage a lot at the factories, but that was their policy.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a great business to be in. Doing 50 hours a week in the motor industry, plus cars are what we do, but the business is far more to me than cars. So it's great to represent some interesting brands, and as you're about to ask me, we represent Lexus, Mazda and Skoda across Cheshire and North Wales, and more widely across the northwest of England.
Right. But going back to when you were sort of, I was going to say, just starting out really, but it's, you're at Rover and so forth. What I'd really love to do is, and perhaps you can pick the seasons, is love to talk about when you felt like, for instance, even starting up the business here, or something that was possibly even laid on your heart by God maybe. I don't know if that's how it came about. But to look at some of the opportunities and challenges and what God has done along the way, for you, as it were, what God has said to you along the way. Are there any seasons that really stand out for you?
Yes, because I think as Christians we're always looking for God's prompting, God's guidance. As Paul talks in his letters, we're looking for the mind of Christ, and we want to please God, and we want prompting from him to know we're in the right place. And that continues all the way through life. I mean, there are key milestones, I guess, in human terms. The ultimate prompting for many of us, not all of us, is God prompting us to choose the right husband or wife. And I believe in God's goodness I have in marrying Anita. And there are other significant milestones and junctions in one's life when one has to make decisions. But I think ever since leaving university I wanted to work for myself, but I sensed I was going to get so much understanding and appreciation of the bigger, wider world working for multinationals and conglomerates, which I did, of course, for 7-8 years before we started the business. But don't confuse what you're seeing today with how we started 30 years ago, Chris.
And that's what I'd love to talk about. So what was it like when you started 30 years ago?
It was very humbling.
Yeah?
I thought I could walk into a bank and borrow £1 million and buy a car dealership. Naively, you might be surprised to hear. But I couldn't. So my wife Anita and I, the year we got married, we put £50 each into a bank account. We bought a company off the shelf for £100, £101 shares. And we borrowed £10,000 from Barclays in Liverpool. And we started, you ready for this? A petrol station.
A petrol station?
No ordinary petrol station.
Of course not.
It was Elf, the French oil company's UK flagship site in Warrington. But I met with people who worked with us, a team of 6 or 7, whose careers weren't the most important things in their life. And they hadn't all been to university. Many left school at 15, 16. So this was the antithesis of what I experienced since graduating and joining big companies. But I met real people with no agenda. They were very upfront. And in fact, 4 out of the 6 from memory lived in the same street behind the service station we had. And they had keys to each other's letterboxes, front doors. And they knew each other well. There was that trust. And it was, perhaps you might say, how life was 20, 30 years ago. But it was eye-opening for me, and I hadn't seen it before.
So what were you learning then, at that time, in life in general, and what was God saying to you at that time?
I was experiencing a much wider demographic than I'd seen before. I was meeting people who valued, in many respects, the simpler things in life, where families were no further than 10 doors up or 10 doors down the street, rather than living in London or even overseas, which was my experience previously. And I think I learned what made people tick.
Oh, right.
So it equipped me well for the journey we started on, and where we find ourselves today, of course.
Yeah. So it was a challenge, but you were learning how people tick, and obviously in terms of running a business, that's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
In terms of running a business, let's go there, because I'm dying to get to where you, in terms of how you run your business and so forth, because you've actually got some sort of props on the ground, and I know we're time sort of limited today, so I want to get to how you run your business.
Okay.
So I'm kind of fast forwarding a bit, because as I said, I know we're time limited. I think I'm right in saying you don't open on a Sunday.
No.
Talk to us about that, because when I interviewed Gary Grant, he doesn't do, with the Entertainer's Toy Store, he also doesn't open on a Sunday. Why don't you open on a Sunday, and what have been the ramifications of that, good and bad?
Well, God's created Sunday to be a really special day, and it's one of the 10 Commandments, and we read right through scriptures how we can keep Sunday special. Some lovely scriptures at the back end of Isaiah 58 about not letting our feet go our own way on the Sunday and doing our own thing. So there's no dress rehearsals in life, and when you're going to do something, you do it now rather than put it off for 5 or 10 years. So I won't get preachy to camera or with you, Chris, about what people should or shouldn't do on a Sunday. That, I believe that's between God and themselves. But that's not to say people can't step back and reflect when they're challenged or they're engaged about the issue. So, would I buy a pint of milk on a Sunday? Yes, I would. Would I buy a newspaper on a Sunday? Yes, I would. And I don't get hung up about what day it was printed and what day it's been sold.
Right.
But I think some things don't have to happen on a Sunday.
Okay.
And I think the purchase of a car, or indeed the servicing of a car, which is equally important to us, can be done one or 6 days a week. So we represented a certain Japanese brand for a good number of years. In fact, we were appointed their dealership of the year, UK, not once, but for 2 consecutive years. It never happened before. But in 2003, there was a decision made that each dealership contract stipulated a requirement to represent the brand 7 days a week. They're spending millions on the television, millions in the newspapers. They wanted to get the bang for their buck and get the best outcome with their advertising spend. And that, in their view, meant opening on a Sunday. Out of 120 locations around the UK, there were only about 5 or 6 that were shut on a Sunday. Some for geographical reasons and commercial reasons, some for faith reasons, and I was in the latter bracket. So when this was announced, I decided to go and visit and sit across a table with them, and they weren't for moving. So either I had to step down, which really wasn't a possibility, or I'd have to walk away from the marriage with them.
Really?
And I did say, at the end of my life, I will be more accountable to my ultimate manufacturer than my motor manufacturer. And we had to close the business down.
You literally had to close the business
I had to
down.
make 30 staff redundant.
So the ramifications of you at that particular time not opening on a Sunday were huge.
Well, it was the dealership we'd started with.
Yeah.
So there was.
Did you ever during that time though sort of think, crumbs? I'm just going to be human here, if I may. Did you ever think, well, maybe I just need to wane on this one and sort of actually open on a Sunday?
Well, that's where trusting in God is critical, and sensing God's hands on the situation, and praying for that extra portion of His peace in your life when you're having to make whatever decision it is.
And did you have that peace at the time?
I did. And just because I'm saying that was relevant in my situation does not mean there's a whole host of other situations in all the folk tuning in, listening in today, that they'll have situations where they need that extra portion of peace as well. So we trusted God. On the last day of June, we made all 30 staff redundant, and we locked the door for the last time. We took our uniforms off, and I wrote to all our customers, and I quoted that scripture in the letter to 2,000 customers. He who honours God, God will honour. I believe I've made the right decision. Please bear with us. And funny enough, one of our customers lived next door to the editor of the Liverpool Daily Post, Echo. And he popped my letter around to his neighbour and said, if it's a quiet news day, you might run this tomorrow. And I became the page 3 boy in the Liverpool Echo. Now, I wasn't there to be critical of the brand we'd had an association with for 8 years and run a very good business. But I did want to speak about biblical values in the workplace. And funnily enough, the BBC picked up the news as well, and they sent their outside broadcast units over from Manchester.
Wow.
It was a very quiet news day. And I was interviewed about this, and the phone-in during the afternoon was, is this Christian car guy absolutely mad? Or is he making sense of life?
Yeah.
And there were mixed views, obviously. But it certainly gave us opportunity to put our position on the map very credibly, very positively, without being critical.
How did you feel in your heart at the time? There you were, this business, your founding business, and you'd had to sort of literally shut the front door because of your Christian values. You had to sort of make 30 staff, as you say, redundant and so forth, and now you're being interviewed for it, which seems like an amazing witness at the end of all that. But how did you feel in your heart?
Well, I had some plans going on in the background.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yes. And the plan was to build a dealership and start another automotive marriage with another brand who would be happy us operating 6 days a week.
Right, okay.
So the business we're sitting in now, Chris, is the business where the Monday after the Friday evening's closure, all 30 staff came and started their careers with a new brand.
So they were unemployed for a weekend, and on the Monday following that Friday, when you locked the doors, you opened the doors to this place and employed every single person.
And that's witness to the fact that God's timing is perfect.
Yeah, not ours.
And that's been given me opportunities to talk about faith very credibly and positively and really to people over many years.
I was going to say that actually. One of the things I was praying to God as I came up and I said, God, what are the things you'd like me to ask Mark?
Yeah.
And I'm not someone who gets a vision every day, that kind of stuff, but I just had this gentle sort of thing go through my mind. Ask him about the kind of God incidence moments throughout his career. Okay, so I just want to say that now. What are the most profound God incident moments throughout your career? But in particular, I felt like I was being asked to ask you something about this context. Because here you are, you own your Christianity publicly, but also sensitively, with your staff, which is really wonderful. You don't preach to anyone, you live it incarnationally. But it just makes you wonder, actually, if there's been many God incidence moments when you've been working here and people have walked in off the street, they've heard your story, I don't know, and God has used that opportunity to sort of, speak something to them. Some of the times you might not even know it, but I'd imagine there's some that you do. Any come to mind?
Yeah. And just to finish on the Sunday issue, Chris, I didn't want to have closed on our front door, on our website, on our business cards. So we have our trading hours Monday to Friday, dum dum dum, Saturday, dum dum dum, Sunday at home with the family.
Nice.
So we didn't want to put closed because we don't like to use negative language in the way we present ourselves. Do you know, I think as we march on through our Christian lives, we develop an even greater confidence in sharing faith. We can see that with Her Majesty the Queen. We might talk about her later. But I've noticed Christmas by Christmas, there's that greater confidence year by year that knowing God, knowing God's calling on your life, knowing God's purpose for you, it's the only way. So in terms of occasions, instance in my life, Chris, that I've encountered since then, every day is a day of engagement, rich with conversations, some of which these days don't come as a surprise to me, as it will for many folk watching. But for others, they might be surprised. But I just urge each of us to develop a greater confidence to articulate faith credibly and warmly, even humorously on occasions. Because for my 112 staff here, I'm the closest many of them will get to seeing a vicar week by week. So I'm their pastor, so I've got pastoral responsibilities for them. So there have been opportunities to talk with staff at the end of the day, even give them a Bible verse that I found helpful for me. And on occasions, there's been a great privilege to pray with staff as well. I know them all. They're all handpicked. And out of the 90 or so full-timers, 70 have worked with me for 10 years or more. So we're travelling through life together.
I met a newbie actually earlier on when I first arrived. She's only been here 22 years, so one day she'll settle in.
That's our finance director.
Absolutely. What was her name again? Are we allowed to say?
It was Julie.
Julie. Bless you, Julie.
Could I share something about pastoring staff?
I was going to say, tell us about how you run your business. You've got some props down there, and perhaps you can incorporate those actually, because one of the things that I've noticed in the very, very short time that I've known Mark, which is literally about an hour or two, but I think I know him a little bit more than that because I've researched him, is Christian faith not only pours out in the way that you've already heard, but in terms of the way he runs his business is absolutely phenomenal, and his retention of staff is record-breaking, it really is. So please tell us about how you run your business.
Well, you're right, retention of staff is key to any successful business. It's very important that when customers come in and come back and revisit, they're recognised. And so how do we do that? Well, we don't change our staff. Well, how do we do that? Well, we either tolerate mediocrity with staff, no, or we get recruitment and selection right from the beginning. So we have a very simple, straightforward structure. We're not a large concern, although we're probably one of the biggest private employers locally. But we have a 2-interview structure. But occasionally, if someone's in a customer-facing role, we'll go and visit them at their work between the first and second interview. Because sometimes, Chris, and you'll be shocked when you hear this, not everything said at interview is always true.
No!
Have you got time to give you an example?
Yeah, go for it.
We had an opportunity to have a site maintenance chap working for us full-time.
Right.
He'd be cutting the grass, he'd be cutting hedges, he'd be doing all kinds of things. So we were a real all-rounder. And it was in the very early days of the business. And I was sitting in my office and I was interviewing this chap called Paul. And every 3 or 4 minutes he'd say, "Mr. Mitchell, you should see my place." I said, really? He said, yes, it's like Kew Gardens. I thought, goodness, that's a wild exaggeration, isn't it? And then 5-6 minutes later, perhaps again, or another 3 or 4 minutes after that, he'd say, Mr. Mitchell, if you're asking me to do this job for you, you should see my place. It's like Kew Gardens. So about after half an hour, I said, Paul, I would like to see your place. He sounded shocked to hear this. I said, well, you've been urging me to look at it for the last half hour. So I buzzed my secretary and she brought a car around the front. And I said, Paul, let's go for a drive and look at your place. How far do you live from here? 2-3 miles? He said, yes. So in his suit and my suit, his was fairly poorly fitting because he was much better shape than me. We went to a very modest terraced house. Through his front door, his wife was in the kitchen washing up. And she said, how did the interview go, love? He said, it's still going on, darling.
Here's Mark.
And I went into his back garden.
And was it like...
That purportedly was like Kew Gardens. Now, Chris, what do you think? Was it Kew Gardens or was it the complete opposite?
I really want to say that it was like Kew Gardens, but...
You know, Chris, it was like Kew Gardens.
Wonderful.
He started with us and he's still with us today.
Is he really?
Yes.
Where is he?
And that's why the housekeeping here, inside and out, is such a high standard. So you've got to recruit well. Recruitment is very important. So in an industry where towards 40% of one's headcount each year would leave or be dismissed, so in our case that'd be over 40 people, we lost 5 people last year. 2 retired, 1 emigrated, 1 we couldn't get on with, and 1 left to join another sector, not another car business.
Okay.
So if we recruit well and we look after staff well, they stay. So we pay 20% over the industry rates.
Oh, right.
So you're not going to leave for financial reasons.
Wow.
I bought a holiday lodge in North Wales.
Check this out. I don't know. Say that again. Listen carefully to this.
Oh,
say that
well,
again.
no.
No, come on, you've got to say.
I think it sounds flash, but there's a lot of common sense behind this.
I'm sure there is, but this is
well,
this
we
is
bought
quite
a
unique.
lovely 5-star lodge on one of 2 5-star sites in North Wales with a swimming pool and a restaurant, and it's next to a lake, and it's a wonderful holiday lodge, and we cut the year into 2 slots a week, 52 weeks a year, so there's 104 slots, and each of the staff invariably go and have a complimentary break there each year without having to put their hand in their pocket. It will probably cost well over £1,000 a week to stay there, and for some of our staff that will be outside their budget, so we want to provide a chance to relax as well as work hard here. That's
and you
important.
do this from your Christian faith. I'm sure it blesses your business and so forth, and you see the fruit of it all, but you do this because I think you got the gift of generosity. Well, on the phone you said, we got the gift. Well, I don't think you used the word gift. I don't think you'd say that about yourself. But you said, hospitality is something really big.
I think we're all generously hearted here, and hospitality is a very big thing for us in our businesses here,
right.
Our 3 businesses.
But I think you got the gift of generosity in this, I really do.
Okay.
But anyway, you bought this place.
Thank you for that affirmation. So it's a wonderful place. I had it 4 years, and I cannot tell you how many joyous notes I've had from my colleagues who've had the most special, memorable times there.
And I read as well that your flower bill goes into the thousands. What's that all about?
We want to be different.
Well, you're certainly that.
Yes, but people don't always appreciate that. They perhaps think purchasing a car is very transactional. And I feel it's distinctly relational. So we've got to be here for you, not just for purchase of a car, but annual servicing and subsequent replacement. So everything we need to do needs to be memorable. So we put we don't send the car out without any fuel in. Every car's fueled up, which is very important. I can't abide people going to pick a car up, then drive to a petrol station and put some petrol in. They've just spent
about the batteries.
10 or 20,000 pounds for the car. But we also put flowers in each car. So the more flowers we buy, Chris, follow the economics here, the better we seem to be doing.
Gotcha. And I heard bacon sandwiches feature large as well.
So we spent £73,000 on flowers last year.
£73,000.
And about £30,000 on hospitality and food. But ask me how much we spent advertising, and I'd struggle to find a bill.
Yeah.
Could I just point to one other thing as well?
Loved you to.
I wanted to celebrate Christmas well here. And many years ago, 14 years ago, I decided to have some carols in our Skoda showroom here. And I invited a Christian girl band to come and sing some carols. My good friend Rob Parsons offered to come and speak and bring us a Christmas message. And we had 300 here. which is wonderful.
Yeah, I bet.
But we probably turned almost as many away who requested tickets, and we didn't have space. So I prayed about it, and in faith, the following year I booked Chester Cathedral. And we now have 1,300 customers. We fill the cathedral every year.
This is an annual thing?
Yeah, it's become the biggest corporate carol event in the country, I understand.
You are kidding me.
So it's really special, and we have some outstanding music.
I'm a church planter, and this is just astonishing. Sorry, carry on.
No, we have some amazing music led by some very gifted and well-known folk who become friends. And we have donkeys in the cathedral, live donkeys. We have the town crier, who's a Christian guy, crying the good news. We have mulled wine, 2,000 mince pies, and we have a wonderful, wonderful time at Christmas. And that's become a key date in our company calendar.
Sorry, what cathedral was it again?
Chester Cathedral.
Tell us about these wonderful things down here.
We were talking, weren't we, Chris, about how we care for our staff and pastor those who we're responsible for in a whole variety of settings. But if you worked at Cadbury's, the week before you got married, you'd be invited to go and meet one of the Cadbury family. I think Sir Timothy Cadbury, Sir Adrian Cadbury, and they would give you a Cadbury's Bible. They were a Quaker family, and it was on their heart to have a Bible in every home in the Cadbury business. Now, not everyone gets married these days, so I had to think of a way of achieving this in a slightly circuitous way. And so Anita, my wife, and I decided we'd go and visit every newborn baby in the business. And it's a great privilege. We tend to go a couple of weeks after the baby's born. The mother-in-law is normally there week one, so we go in the second week. And we take some wonderful little boots, because no one ever buys newborns anything like this. But
look at that!
Yeah. The boys don't wear pink, the boys wear blue.
They wear blue, okay.
And they'll live on the fireplace for 12 months before the little one starts walking.
That's amazing.
Lovely conversation starter. And of course, the book that my two boys grew up with, I must have read with Anita, the David and Goliath story, over 100 times them. Some of the faces in here, some of the caricatures, Chris, are first rate. And it's the best-selling book in the world. It's the best-read book in the world.
Absolutely.
And it's the most important book in publication. So my staff are breeding like rabbits at the moment. So
there's something in the air.
It's something in the workshop, I think. So we've had the privilege of making 8 or 10 visits every year for many, many years now. And it's great going around in jeans and an open neck shirt to some of these wonderful families who I feel very responsible for as the leader of the business.
Because we're time limited, there's just, if I may just move on, there are two areas of your life that I would love to capture in this God story, if I may. The first one is your appointment to be High Sheriff, and I'd like to ask you about that, but also your recent ill health. And I'd kind of like to finish on that, if I may. But we'll start with the High Sheriff one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Tell us, how did that come about? I understand you got to meet the Queen and the royal family generally.
It's top secret, I can't tell you. Ever since about 900 AD, every county in England and Wales has had a shire reeve.
If you're watching this in America, listen closely. This is just brilliant. Go on, carry on.
So Cheshire, Lancashire, Shropshire, even Devonshire.
Londonshire doesn't quite work. So carry on.
We have one for Greater London. And the shire reeve was invariably a man with great influence and power. He, not so nowadays I'm pleased to say, he would collect all the taxes and send most of it to London after his small commission. He was also responsible for law and order and would oversee public floggings and even public executions. I have a lot of clout. And in centuries to follow, the High Court judges would come, probably on horseback, and they'd meet them at the county border, and they'd ensure they're balance their journey to where the assizes were, the courts, and they would sit in court, and they'd live with the High Sheriff for as long as 3 months and hear all the cases that weren't taken by less experienced judges. But it was quite an expensive job being a high sheriff, because the High Court judge wouldn't come on the 10 past 10 from Euston to Chester Station as he does now. He'd come with an entourage of 150 people who needed accommodation and feeding.
Your lodge.
And probably some ale. Yes. The high sheriff's role now, and in Chester we've had high sheriffs since the 1100s, is more ceremonial.
Oh, okay.
But it's a royal appointment. And
can you still arrest people and flog them and so forth and execute them if you wanted to? In a nice Christian way.
It's a great privilege to represent Her Majesty in the field of law and order. And so you are the link between the Crown and sequentially the police force who would arrest, the honour recorder, the judges who would try and sentence, the prison governors who are there to ensure the prison sentences carried through, and the probation service who are putting folk back in the right direction when they're released from prison. But it's much wider than that, and you have a chance to touch so many aspects of county life. In Cheshire, we have 1 million people. Mm-hmm. We have 4,000 charities looking after us all, who are doing an amazing job. Mm-hmm. Tremendous, so many Christians are involved and called into these kind of fields, charitable work. And it's been a real privilege to get alongside people who...
Do you think it was a God thing?
Oh, hugely.
Like the appointment itself, like God making it happen?
Well, I hope you know the verse from Esther. Esther chapter 4, for such a time as this, a royal appointment. And it is a royal appointment. Uh-huh. And I feel, certainly in the run to coronavirus, it was for such a time as this.
Explain that.
Well, I believe God's called me to be High Sheriff for such a time as this.
But in terms of like why, basically? So like what?
Because we can be the voice of sense. Right. We have something to say as Christians. In each and every situation we find ourselves in, not just my situation, obviously, but for me, I was very clear that God had called me to do this work, which has been hugely eye-opening. And meeting people who are living sacrificially and giving so much of their time and resources to seeing a real difference in people's lives across the county of Cheshire. So yes, we have royal visits, and it's been a great privilege to welcome the royal family to Cheshire and to accompany them on the various visits they have. Also the armed forces, when we have armed forces representation. But there's been a whole host of experiences which Anita and I have enjoyed undertaking.
If you've got time, I'd love to cover your recent spell of ill health, which was, well, I say ill health, it was actually quite severe.
Yes.
What happened?
Well, I've experienced good health all my life. Mm-hmm. Apart from falling off the spectators barrier at Tranmere Rovers at the age of 15 and breaking my collarbone.
Ouch.
I've never seen a hospital since or before. So I was away with Anita and James and Elliot in Spring Harvest camp site holidays in France for our regular annual holiday. Mm-hmm. And the last day I was there, a rather unpleasant headache came on. Mm-hmm. In fact, worse than unpleasant. And I managed to get back, and I'd never had a headache like it. And I went for a scan within hours of being back. Mm-hmm. And I was detained in hospital for a second and then third more gruesome scan. And I was wheeled into an operating theatre with no notice at all and been told that I'd had a brain hemorrhage. So this was a real shock to me. And my mother had died of a brain hemorrhage 20 years earlier.
And was it, well, obviously, I guess it was life-threatening, but how did they give you a sense of how long you might have had it not been treated?
Well, they
so
suggested
swiftly?
I had an operation, and I was about to decline, saying, you must be far too busy to treat me today. How about I come back in a month's time? And they said, you've got a 50-50 chance of being here in a month's time.
Really?
I said, how about we do the operation today then?
Yeah.
So there were a number of people in the theatre, and I asked about 3 or 4 minutes with Anita. Mm-hmm. James and Elliot were away on summer camps. After we'd got back, they'd had a quick turnaround and gone off again. And we prayed together and talked, realising this was very serious, and the conversation we're having was very serious as well. We prayed together, and then I went in for surgery for about 3 hours. And I had brain surgery. And
Did they do the thing where like you were still sort of conscious whilst you're doing it?
Oh no, it was a bit more serious than that.
Oh really?
Yeah. So a brain hemorrhage, just so you understand, Chris, one in 30 of us have an abnormality on a blood vessel. It'll be a millimetre or so, but that's enough for 1 in 15,000 of those 1 in 30. That's 1 in 450,000 to have a rupture on the vessel and have a bleed on the brain or a brain hemorrhage. And that's the place I found myself in. So very rare. And they had to get into my brain and insert a coil into the aneurysm. So I won't go into details, but it was a very serious operation.
Yeah.
And I was in hospital for a good time afterwards and discharged. And I just felt so loved and cared for by pals from church, pals from the business world, Christian friends from much further afield. And I had a very, very long process of recovery, and it was tough. And yet you sense God's hand on the whole situation. I referred to peace earlier in the interview, but a real sense of God's peace during this whole process.
Really?
But you're experiencing sensations you'd never have had before. You'd be tired, you'd be uncomfortable, you'd be in pain. But there again, we have to trust in God, don't we? And that's the pivotal time when the rubber hits the road, in automotive terms, and we do have to just throw ourselves at the mercy of God.
Can I ask you the $6 million question? Why do you think God allowed it to happen?
I don't know, but let me answer that with another comment. I have a good friend in London called Lyndon Bowring. He runs Care. And he'd said, Mark, God has saved you for a purpose, and it's your job to find out what that purpose is.
And have you?
And as we come down to land, it was 2 years before I began as High Sheriff of Cheshire. It was 3 years before I had to lead the business through the coronavirus saga.
Right.
And I believe I'm in the role I'm today for such a time as this. Esther chapter 4.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was absolutely priceless. Life-changing event, life and death event, and I thank you for your candor in that. It's a really amazing thing to actually have that now recorded. Last question. And if you'd be willing to pray us out after that, that would be superb. You don't have to, I can do it if you don't like doing that sort of thing, but that would be great. It's a theological question, which I ask every interviewee, and there's no, in some sense, right or wrong answer. It's what you feel is the answer, okay? Imagine, stand by, imagine you're in the Easter garden on the very first Easter day. You actually are a gardener, because Jesus was mistaken as a gardener, but you actually are a gardener. You're raking around, it's the Middle East, as it were. And you're in earshot and eyeshot of the exchange between Jesus and Mary. The exchange where Jesus turns around to her and says, don't hold on to me, so I've not yet risen to my Father. But it's the first Easter day, Jesus has just risen from the dead. What happened to humanity on that first Easter day?
We realise that Jesus Christ was, in fact, the Son of God. He wasn't just a good man. He wasn't just a teacher. He wasn't just a prophet. He was the man who God had sent to change the world then, in 2,000 years' time, and for many, many years to come.
Amen. Mark, it's been an absolute joy meeting you. It really, really has. I can't thank you enough for your time, because I know you're a busy, busy man. And as I said at the beginning, I hope this interview touches the lives of countless people, not just when it first goes live, but as we promote and develop the channel and all the work for God's Stories today. If you're willing, would you mind praying us out?
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we're reminded day by day of your goodness and your deep love for each one of us. And we want to experience that even more. We also want to share that with those around us, those we work with, those we live next to, and those who've been friends for a very, very long time who perhaps we believe have their hearts closed to the good news of Jesus Christ. We pray that through this work and through the work that Chris is leading and the countless folk he's speaking to in months to come, that you would speak clearly into even more lives, making even more of a difference in people's lives, so that we can honour you as you honour us. Amen.
Amen.